I'm Stephanie Sherwood. I consider myself a painter, and I explore many different media and surfaces.
How did your background influence the style of art that you make today?
I'm not really sure, I remember in school they told us to not worry about style because I think when you're just starting out and you're just learning how to paint and how to make work, I think as a young artist, you're very focused on style and you have an idea of styles that you like and styles that you don't like. And our teachers really wanted to kind of steer us away from that and just focus on learning the skills we needed to learn. So that's basically what I did, I focused on just learning to draw and paint, just handle the media of paint. I feel like there's always a bit of my way of mark making that has stuck with me through the years, but my method of drawing has definitely changed a little bit over the years. So I think it's kind of just an intuitive process, and you just kind of end up where you end up as you continue following your path.
If somebody was engaging your artwork and it was the first time that they had ever really viewed art, how would you describe what it is that you're doing to them?
I would probably start off by just describing that I'm primarily a painter. That's at least how I consider myself. I like applying paint to things. I just love paint and I love to draw. But I guess I like to kind of push those boundaries a bit in terms of what painting or drawing can mean, and how that meaning can change depending on the context. Having the opportunity to exhibit here at Pierce College in their art gallery is wonderful because it's an opportunity to see a framed work on the wall alongside something painted in the site, specifically on a derelict couch, and what does that context mean, particularly when they're right next to each other, they're juxtaposed there.
And you touched on it a little bit, but what does your work aim to say?
It all kind of stems from this kind of fear of death and the fact that our bodies are aging and changing and kind of decomposing as we age. And those kind of experiences of existence that we tend to want to overlook because they're uncomfortable. In this series, I came to a place where I started realizing that I wanted to simplify it down and have it be less about having to represent meat or body parts, and started just focusing on these two very simple structures. There's the soft kind of form versus the rigid structural form, and how those two things kind of oppose one another, and what happens when they do meet and press into each other, and all these weird kind of moments of the soft stuff pressing through the bars. To me, it's really about this, what restrictions are placed on you as a person from being able to really fully be that expression of your person, your soul, your interests, because there's always very rarely are you able to fully just be. There's always something that you run into, whether you just don't have enough time, you don't have enough money, you don't, that's always something. And I feel that's a very universal thing that a lot of people could relate to.
So is that where you draw inspiration from?
Yeah, just life itself and life's struggles. But I also draw inspiration a lot from Los Angeles, from the city of Los Angeles. The parts of the city that most people would think of as dirty or a little gritty or something. I see a lot of beauty in that kind of industrial, just kind of the way that the busyness and the bustling of the city kind of spills out into the streets and sidewalks, Obviously with the furniture pieces, that's a lot of that for me. I see a lot of beauty in these things that tend to be overlooked. Then I approach it, with my imagery and the way that I paint, and I apply it there, and it is a way of giving it a new life. And that's why I do try and find objects and furniture that I don't think could be used. I mean, obviously, sometimes you see things on the street that are actually like really nice and someone could just pick it up and use it. So I try and not, make artwork with something that I think somebody could use. I usually make sure it's like pretty broken or pretty dirty, but it is interesting and it speaks to a lot of different kind of ideas about like modern life, like these days furniture, is not made to last.
And is that why you paint on furniture? Because there is this brief window of time that people experience it?
That's definitely part of the reason I paint on the furniture. I also love the idea that, it's public, it's out in the world, and you can encounter an artwork when you're not anticipating it. You're not walking to a gallery or museum where you're anticipating to encounter an artwork. You're like walking your dog or you're on your morning run or something. And I don't know, I've always been really interested in that moment of discovery. And I think that can be really exciting. I don't know. I'm always curious to if I do run into people, like to ask like what they think.
What is it like to create public work that is so ephemeral?
I had to get used to and get comfortable with the idea of saying goodbye to something as soon as it was done, because I knew it wouldn't last very long. I think that gives it a different kind of poignance. It becomes performative. And I've always kind of felt like performance art is like such a like just a badass media. It's like this section of art that refuses to be commodified and refuses to be turned into anything that can be held onto. It's inherently ephemeral, and I think there's so much beauty to that. So it's like my my funny way of being able to approach performance, which I've always very much admired as an art form.
Another series of work that you had, Meat Market, I believe was a lot of your style of painting on garments that were meant to be worn or could be worn. And I think you had some performance aspects as well go along with that series. So would you be able to maybe describe some of that work as well and where it fit into your overall practice?
Oh, yeah. So Meat Market is a whole body of work that I made with my good friend and fellow artist, Katie Shanks, who is a primarily a fiber-based artist. And they started making these wearable works that also deal very heavily with the body and the experience of being in the body. So we already had this kind of like similar overlap in interest with the body and the abject and this kind of grossness of being. It was a feminist project that really spoke to this notion of femicide and violence against women and non-male people, which is unfortunately very rampant in many countries. So it was really speaking to that experience of being the gender or genders that is not in power and having that power levied against them. When it first started, we made a series that was meant for a fashion show. And then we developed it into a whole show. We had dance and we were reading essays, feminist essays. And so that work, like you said, got into a very performative realm with a very specific type of message. So it was really interesting to explore that side of things.
You also curate quite a few shows yourself. Is there any similarity in your artistic lens between your curation work and your own art practice?
I think both my art practice and my curatorial practice have become sort of nomadic in a sense, which, reflecting back on it, I realized that, I moved around. My family and I moved around a lot when I was a kid because my parents were both in the military and the Air Force. So we tended to move around a lot anyways. So it was almost like, I was trying to relate to each new place I was in this very specific way, as I was growing up. So as an artist, I think that became really important to my practice. And similar in my curatorial practice, I tend to curate very, very specifically to a space. The largest curatorial show that I've done was called Portals, and it was at Angels Gate Cultural Center. And that one was very much, I knew the space. I visited the space many times, and I ended up developing a proposal for an exhibition that was specific to the gallery's placement, which overlooks the Port of Los Angeles. There's definitely like through lines there in like all of these type of work that I do. And yeah, I love both. I love making art. I love curating art and working with artists. It's really engaging for me.
Do you have any vision on how your artwork will transform in the future?
Not specifically, but I am starting to explore new ideas when it comes to this idea of found objects in my work. I've just recently, just this year actually, just started actually like taking things from the street and bringing them back to the studio to figure out how to, tussle with those ideas like in the studio. Yeah, I never know exactly how things are going to go.
Where can people go to support you and follow your artwork?
I have a website, stephaniesherwoodart.com. I'm on Instagram at Stephanie_Sherwood_art. So that's pretty much where I'm at. And I try to be good about posting on social media, but
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time for this.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for all the wonderful questions.